2 Chronicles 20. It happened after this that the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, along with some of the Ammonites, went out to war against Jehoshaphat. People came and told Jehoshaphat, saying, "A great multitude is coming against you from the other side of the sea, from Aram. Behold, they are already in Hazazon Tamar, which is En Gedi." He was afraid, so Jehoshaphat turned his attention to seek Hashem, and he proclaimed a fast upon all of Judah. Judah was gathered to beseech Hashem. They came even from all the cities of Judah to beseech Hashem. Jehoshaphat stood in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem in the temple of Hashem, before the new courtyard, and he said, "O Hashem, God of our fathers, behold, you are God in heaven, and you rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, and no one can stand up against you. Surely you are our God. You drove out the inhabitants of this land from before your people Israel, and you gave it forever to the descendants of Abraham, who loved you. They settled in it, and in it they built for you a sanctuary for your name, saying, if misfortune should come upon us, war, judgment, plague, or famine, we will stand before this temple and before you, for your name is in this temple. And we will cry out to you in our affliction, and you will hear us and save us. Now, behold, the people of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom you did not allow Israel to invade when they came out of Egypt. Rather, they turned away from them and did not destroy them. But behold, they are repaying us by coming to expel us from your heritage that you have bequeathed to us. Our God, will you not perform justice against them? For we have no strength before this great multitude that is invading us. We do not know what we should do. Rather, our eyes are upon you. All of Judah were standing before Hashem, including their little children, their wives, and their sons. The spirit of Hashem then came upon Jahaziel, son of Zechariah, son of Jael, son of Mattaniah the Levite, of the descendants of Asaph. In the midst of the congregation, he said, "Pay attention, all of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. Thus said Hashem concerning you, do not fear and do not be intimidated before this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow, go down against them. Behold, they are advancing by the Ziz ascent, and you will find them at the end of the ravine, facing the wilderness of Jeruel. It is not for you to do battle in this matter. Be erect, stand still, and see the salvation of Hashem for you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not fear and do not be broken. Tomorrow, go out before them, and Hashem will be with you." Jehoshaphat bowed down with his face to the ground, and all of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell down before Hashem to prostrate themselves to Hashem. The Levites, of the children of the Kohathites and of the children of the Korahites, rose up to praise Hashem, God of Israel, with an exceedingly loud voice. The people arose early in the morning, and they went out to the wilderness of Tekoa. As they were leaving, Jehoshaphat stood up and said, "Hear me, Judah, and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Have faith in Hashem, your God, and show yourselves loyal. Have faith in his prophets, and be successful." He conferred with the people, and he set up men to sing to Hashem and men to laud his majestic holiness. As they went out before the frontline troops, they said, "Give thanks to Hashem, for his mercy endures forever." As soon as they began their exuberant song and praise, Hashem set up ambushers against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who were attacking Judah, and they were struck down. The people of Ammon and Moab then rose up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir to destroy and annihilate them. And when they finished with the inhabitants of Seir, they assisted in destroying one another. When Judah reached the lookout over the wilderness, they turned to look at the multitude and saw that they were all corpses, fallen upon the ground, with no survivors. Jehoshaphat and his people then went to plunder their spoils, and they found an abundance among them, riches and corpses with luxurious items, and they removed it from them until it could not be carried. They spent 3 days plundering the spoils, so abundant was it. On the 4th day they gathered at Emek Berashah, the valley of blessing, for they praised Hashem there. Hence, They named that place Emek Berashah until this day. All the men of Judah and Jerusalem, with Jehoshaphat at their head, turned back to return to Jerusalem in joy, for Hashem had given them joy from the downfall of their enemy. They came to Jerusalem with lyres and harps and trumpets to the temple of Hashem. A dread of God came upon all the kingdoms of the lands when they heard that Hashem was doing battle with the enemies of Israel. Jehoshaphat's reign was thus tranquil, for his God granted him respite from all around. So Jehoshaphat reigned over Israel. He was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Asubah, daughter of Shili. He followed the way of his father Asa and did not deviate from it, doing what was proper in the eyes of Hashem. However, the high places did not cease. The people still did not dedicate their hearts to the God of their forefathers. The rest of the earlier and the later events of Jehoshaphat, behold, they are recorded in the words of Jehu, son of Hanani, which was appended to the book of the kings of Israel. Afterward, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, allied himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel, who had acted wickedly. He joined forces with him to make a fleet to go to Tarshish, and they built ships in Ezion-Geber. Eliezer, son of Dodavah of Marashah, prophesied about Jehoshaphat, saying, "Because you have allied yourself with Ahaziah, Hashem has wrecked your undertakings." The ships broke down and did not succeed in going to Tarshish. 2 Chronicles 21. Jehoshaphat lay with his forefathers and was buried with his forefathers in the city of David. His son Jehoram reigned in his place. He had brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Asariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Asariahu, Mishael, and Shephatiah. All these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father gave them many gifts of gold and silver and luxurious objects, along with fortified cities in Judah. But he gave the kingship to Jehoram, for he was the firstborn. Jehoram rose up over the kingdom of his father, and he strengthened himself in it. He killed all of his brothers by the sword, as well as some of the officers of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he reigned, and he reigned for 8 years in Jerusalem. He went in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done, for Ahab's daughter had become his wife. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem. But Hashem did not wish to destroy the house of David because of the covenant he had sealed with David, in accordance with what he had said, that he would give dominion to him and to his descendants all the days. In his days, Edom rebelled against the rule of Judah, and they appointed a king over themselves. So Jehoram went with his officers and with all his chariots. He arose in the night and smote Edom, which had surrounded him, and the chariot captains. But Edom rebelled against being under the hand of Judah to this day. Then Libnah rebelled against his rule at that time, for he had forsaken Hashem, the God of his fathers. Furthermore, he erected high places in the mountains of Judah. He caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to go astray, and he induced Judah to sin. A letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, "Thus said Hashem, the God of your forefather David, because you did not follow the ways of your father Jehoshaphat and the ways of Asa, king of Judah, but you followed the way of the kings of Israel, and you caused Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to go astray as the house of Ahab caused people to go astray. And you even murdered your brothers, your father's household, who were superior to you. Behold, Hashem is inflicting a great plague upon your people, and upon your sons and your wives and all your wealth. You will suffer many diseases in an intestinal illness until your innards come out, and because of the illness, year after year." Hashem aroused against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabs who were near the Ethiopians. They attacked Judah, and they breached its defenses. They seized all the wealth that was found in the king's palace, as well as his children and wives. There was no son left to him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. After all this, Hashem struck him in his intestines with an incurable disease. It plagued him for an entire year, and at the time when the deadline arrived, after 2 years, his intestines came out because of his disease, and he died of terrible illnesses. His people did not make a pyre for him like the pyre of his forefathers. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 8 years in Jerusalem. He departed without enjoyment, and they buried him in the city of David, but not in the graves of the kings. 2 Chronicles 22. The inhabitants of Jerusalem proclaimed Ahaziah his youngest son king in his place, for all the older ones were killed by the troops that came with the Arabs to the camp. So Ahaziah son of Jehoram reigned as king of Judah. Ahaziah was 42 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, the granddaughter of Omri. He too followed the way of the house of Ahab, for his mother would advise him to act wickedly. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, like the house of Ahab, for they were his advisers after his father's death, to ward his destruction. Moreover, upon their advice he went to war with Jehoram son of Ahab, king of Israel, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth-Gilead, and the Arameans wounded Jehoram. He returned to convalescent Jezreel because of the wounds that they had inflicted upon him at the Ramah as he battled against Hazael, king of Aram. Azariah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to visit Jehoram, son of Ahab, in Jezreel, for he was ill. It was God's decree for the ruination of Ahaziah that he should come to Jehoram, for when he was there, he went out with Jehoram toward Jehu, son of Nimshi, whom Hashem had anointed to eliminate the house of Ahab. It happened when Jehu executed judgment against the house of Ahab, that he found the officers of Judah and Ahaziah's nephew attending to Ahaziah, and he killed them. He looked for Ahaziah, and his men apprehended him while he was hiding in Samaria. They brought him to Jehu, and they put him to death and buried him. For they said, "He is the grandson of Jehoshaphat, who sought out Hashem with all his heart." There was no one in Ahaziah's household who could muster the power to reign. When Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son had died, she arose and exterminated all the offspring of the royal family of Judah. But Jehoshabeath, the king's daughter, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and smuggled him from the midst of the king's sons who were being killed, and put him and his nursemaid in the bedchamber. Jehoshabeath, daughter of King Jehoram and wife of Jehoiada the Cohen, because she was Ahaziah's sister, hid him from Athaliah so she could not put him to death. He remained with them in the temple of God, hidden for 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. 2 Chronicles 23. In the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself and took the captains of hundreds, Azariah son of Jehoram, Ishmael son of Jehohanan, Azariah son of Obed, Maaseiah son of Adahiah, and Elishaphat son of Zishri, into a covenant with him. They circulated in Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the family heads of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. The entire assembly sealed a covenant in the temple of God with the king. Jehoiada said to them, "Behold, the son of the king shall reign, as Hashem spoke about the descendants of David. This is what you are to do. A third of those of you, of the Kohanim and the Levites, who are arriving on the Sabbath, will be gatekeepers of the doorways. A third will be stationed at the king's palace, and a third will be stationed at the foundation gate, while all the people will be in the courtyards of the temple of Hashem. No one is to enter the temple of Hashem except for the Kohanim and the ministers among the Levites. They may enter, for they are holy. All the people are to keep the watch of Hashem. The Levites shall then encircle the king all around, each man with his weapons in his hand. Anyone who enters the temple shall be put to death. You must remain with the king when he goes out and when he comes in." So the Levites and all of Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the Cohen had commanded them. Each one took his men, those who were arriving on the Sabbath and those who were leaving on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the Cohen had not dismissed the outgoing shifts. Jehoiada the Cohen gave to the captains of hundreds the spears and the shields of King David, which were in the temple of God. He stationed all the people, each man with his weapon in his hand, from the right flank of the temple to the left flank, near the altar and the sanctuary, surrounding the king. They then brought out the king's son and placed the crown and the divine testimony upon him. They declared him king, and Jehoiada and his sons anointed him. And they said, "Long live the king!" Athaliah heard the sound of the people who were rushing and who were shouting praises to the king. And she came to the people in the temple of Hashem. She looked, and there was the king standing at his position at the entryway, with the officers and the trumpets next to the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets, and the singers with their musical instruments giving instructions to sing praises. Athaliah tore her garments and shouted, "A rebellion! A rebellion!" Jehoiada the Cohen took aside the captains of hundreds, the officers of the force, and said to them, "Take her away, but keep her within the ranks of the guards, and anyone who comes after her shall be slain by the sword." For the Cohen said, "Do not put her to death in the temple of Hashem." They made place for her, and she came to the entrance of the horse's gate, to the palace of the king, and they put her to death there. Jehoiada then sealed a covenant between himself, between all the people and the king, to be the people of Hashem. All the people came to the temple of Baal, and they tore it down. They smashed its altars and images, and Matan, the priest of the Baal, they slew in front of the altars. Jehoiada established administrators over the temple of Hashem by the Kohanim and the Levites, whom David had divided into divisions for the temple of Hashem, to offer up the burnt offerings of Hashem, as it is written in the Torah of Moses, through joy and through songs made by the hands of David. He stationed the gatekeepers at the gates of the temple of Hashem, so that no impure person might enter for any purpose. He took the captains of hundreds, the nobles and the rulers of the people, and all the people of the land. And he escorted the king down from the temple of Hashem. They proceeded by way of the upper gate to the royal palace, and sat the king upon the royal throne. The entire people of the land rejoiced, and the city was tranquil, for Athaliah had been put to death by the sword. 2 Chronicles 24. Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Sebiah of Beersheba. Joash did what was proper in the eyes of Hashem all the days of Jehoiada the Cohen. Jehoiada married 2 wives and fathered sons and daughters. It happened after this that it entered Joash's heart to renovate the temple of Hashem. He gathered the Kohanim and the Levites and said to them, "Go out to the cities of Judah and collect money from all of Israel every year to strengthen the temple of your God. Now, you hurry in this matter." But the Levites did not hurry. So the king summoned Jehoiada, the chief, and said to him, "Why have you not demanded of the Levites to bring from Judea and Jerusalem the levy ordained by Moses, servant of God, upon the congregation of Israel for the tent of the testimony?" For Athaliah the evildoer and her sons had made breaches in the temple of God. They also used all the consecrated objects of the temple of Hashem for the Baal idols. The king issued an order, and they made a single chest and placed it at the gate of the temple of Hashem on the outside. They made an announcement throughout Judah and Jerusalem that the people should bring to Hashem the levy ordained by Moses, the servant of God, upon Israel in the wilderness. All the officers and all the people were glad. They brought money and dropped it into the chest until it was full. It happened that whenever they would bring the chest to the administration of the king, in the charge of the Levites, when they saw that there was much money, the king's scribe and an official of the chief Cohen would come, empty out the chest, lift it up, and return it to its place. So they did every day, and they collected a large amount of money. The king and Jehoiada gave it to the overseers of the labor for the work on the temple of Hashem, who hired with it hewers and craftsmen to renovate the temple of Hashem, and also craftsmen of iron and copper to strengthen the temple of Hashem. The workmen acted, and the work flourished in their hands. They restored the temple of God to its proper status, and they strengthened it. When they finished, they brought the remaining money before the king and Jehoiada, who made it into vessels for the temple of Hashem, ministering vessels, mortars, pans, and golden and silver instruments. They continually offered burnt offerings in the temple of Hashem all the days of Jehoiada. Jehoiada grew old, sated with years, and he died. He was 130 years old when he died. They buried him in the city of David with the kings, for he had been benevolent toward Israel and toward God and his temple. After Jehoiada died, the leaders of Judah came and prostrated themselves to the king. From then on, the king listened to them. They forsook the temple of Hashem, the God of their fathers, and worshiped the Asherah trees and the idols. There was divine fury against Judah and Jerusalem for this transgression of theirs. He sent prophets among them to bring them back to Hashem, and they admonished them, but they did not listen. A spirit of God came over Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the Cohen. He stood above the people and said to them, "Thus said God, why are you transgressing the commandments of Hashem? You will not succeed, for you have forsaken Hashem. So he has forsaken you." But they conspired against him and stoned him with rocks, by the command of the king, in the courtyard of the temple of Hashem. Thus, King Joash did not remember the kindness that Zechariah's father Jehoiada had done for him, and he killed his son. As he was dying, he said, "May God see this and demand redress." It happened at the turn of the year that the army of Aram attacked Joash. They invaded Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the officers of the people from among the people, and they sent all their spoils to the king of Damascus. For with a small force of men had the army of Aram come, but Hashem delivered a great deal of wealth into their hands. For Israel had forsaken Hashem, God of their fathers. They also executed judgment against Joash when they went away from him, for they left him with many wounds. His servants rebelled against him because of the blood of the sons of Jehoiada the Cohen, and they killed him on his bed, and he died. They buried him in the city of David, although they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. These are the men who rebelled against him: Sabad, son of Shimeath the Ammonite, and Jehoshaphat, son of Shimrith the Moabite. The story of his sons, the multitude of prophecies against him, and the establishment of the temple of God, behold, they are recorded in the narration of the book of Kings. His son Amaziah reigned in his place. 2 Chronicles 25. At 25 years of age, Amaziah became king, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem. He did what was proper in the eyes of Hashem, but not with a perfect heart. It happened that when the kingship became firmly established with him, he killed his servants who had assassinated his father, the king. But he did not put their sons to death, as it is written in the Torah, in the book of Moses, which Hashem had commanded, saying, "Fathers shall not die because of sons, and sons shall not die because of fathers. Rather, a man should die for his own sin." Amaziah gathered Judah together, and he organized them according to their paternal families, under officers of thousands and officers of hundreds. For all of Judah and Benjamin, he counted them from the age of 20 years and up, and found them to be 300,000 chosen men, ready to go out to war, bearing spear and shield. He also hired 100,000 mighty warriors from Israel for 100 talents of silver. A man of God came to him, saying, "O king, let the army of Israel not go with you, for Hashem is not with Israel, all the children of Ephraim. For if you do go, readying yourself and strengthening yourself for war, God will cause you to fall before the enemy, for God has the power to aid or to bring defeat." Amaziah said to the man of God, "What shall I do about the 100 talents that I have given to the Israelite troop?" The man of God replied, "Hashem can give you much more than that." So Amaziah separated the troop that had come to him from Ephraim, so that they could go to their place. Their wrath burned against Judah, and they returned to their place in a rage. Amaziah strengthened himself and led his people, going out to the valley of Salt, where he struck down 10,000 men of the children of Seir. The children of Judah also captured 10,000 men alive. They brought them to the top of the cliff and threw them off of the top of the cliff, and they all burst open. Meanwhile, the people of the troop whom Amaziah had turned away from going to war with him spread out in the cities of Judah, from Samaria to Beth Horon, and struck down 3,000 of them, plundering much booty. It happened that when Amaziah came back after killing the Edomites and brought the deities of Edom with him, that he set them up for himself as gods. He would bow down to them and burn incense to them. So God became angry with Amaziah. He sent a prophet to him who said to him, "Why do you seek the gods of another nation who did not save their people from your hands?" It happened that when he spoke to him, Amaziah said to him, "Did we appoint you as an advisor to the king? Desist, lest they strike you." So the prophet desisted. But he said, I know that God has made a plan to destroy you, for you have done this thing, and you have not heeded my counsel. Amaziah, king of Judah, took counsel and sent messengers to Joash, son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, Let us confront one another in battle. Joash, king of Israel, sent word back to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, The thorn bush in Lebanon once sent word to the cedar of Lebanon, saying, Give your daughter to my son for a wife. The wild beast of Lebanon then came by and trampled the thorn bush. You think, Behold, I have struck Edom, and your heart became arrogant to seek honor. Now stay at home. Why should you provoke evil against yourself and be defeated, you and Judah with you? But Amaziah did not listen, for it was ordained by God, in order to deliver them into Israel's hand, for they had sought out the gods of Edom. So Joash, king of Israel, went up and they confronted each other, he and Amaziah, king of Judah, in Beth-Shemesh, which is in Judah. Judah was defeated before Israel, and they fled, each man to his home. Joash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, son of Jehoahaz, in Beth-Shemesh. He then brought him to Jerusalem, and he made a breach in the wall of Jerusalem, from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, a distance of 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and silver and all the articles that were found in the temple of God with Obed-Edom, and the treasuries of the king's palace, along with the hostage children, and he returned to Samaria. Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, lived for 15 years after the death of Joash, son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. The rest of the earlier and the later deeds of Amaziah, behold, they are recorded in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. From the time that Amaziah turned away from Hashem, they organized a revolt against him in Jerusalem. So he fled to Lachish. But they sent after him to Lachish and killed him there. They carried him with horses, and they buried him in Jerusalem with his forefathers in the city of Judah.